Annabelle sat at the edge of her seat, her fingers tapping nervously on the cold metal surface of the table. The silence in the chamber felt oppressive, like the weight of 1,000 years of galactic history hung in the air. The council members, an assortment of alien species from across the galaxy, had been whispering among themselves, their voices barely audible over the hum of the chamber's artificial atmosphere. Across from her, General Varek of the Vahani and Commander Silas of the Elris exchanged wary glances. Annabelle could feel the tension building as the two leaders locked eyes, each waiting for the other to make a move. Yet in this moment, it was clear that their disagreements, their hatred for each other, would not be the focus of the meeting. All eyes were on her and the human delegation. The real question, the one that had been building since their arrival, was simple. Why were humans unarmed? The Galactic Council had never trusted any species to walk into its chambers unarmed, except for humans. Annabelle knew this. The stories about humanity's strange history in the galaxy, about their wars and triumphs, had spread far and wide. Yet this was different. The Council's decision to allow humanity into their sacred chambers, unarmed and seemingly unprepared for whatever lay ahead, was unsettling to most. Even Annabelle herself had doubts, but she had come this far, and there was no turning back now. The Council's speaker, a tall and regal being known as Ithra, stepped forward. Ithra was one of the oldest members of the Council, a representative of the ancient species called the Jarkai. Their long, shimmering robes and their shimmering, almost ethereal presence made them seem like beings from a dream rather than reality. "We have brought you here, humans, not because we believe you are the strongest or the wisest or even the most advanced," Ithra began in a voice that resonated throughout the chamber. "We have brought you here because of something far more precious." Annabelle's eyes narrowed as she leaned forward, sensing that the moment had come. What did they mean? What could humans offer to the galaxy that the other species hadn't already? "We brought you here," Ithra continued, "because of your spirit." The speaker paused, letting the words sink in before his gaze shifted to each of the human representatives seated at the table. "You may not have the most advanced technology, nor the longest history of peace, but you have something far more powerful, the ability to unite in times of crisis, to fight for what is right, even when it seems impossible." Annabelle felt a chill run down her spine. What was Ithra talking about? She exchanged a quick look with Ethan, her second in command, who gave her a barely noticeable nod. There was more to this story than they were being told. "Many centuries ago," Ithra said, his voice growing softer, "your species was considered a failure. A test was made. The ancient ones, the ones who built the very foundations of this galaxy, sought to see if humanity could ever be a true force for peace. But you failed, and your kind was isolated. You became forgotten." Annabelle's heart skipped a beat. Humanity had been tested before. She had never heard of such a thing, and the implications of what Ithra was saying were staggering. "Yet we did not forget," Ithra continued. "We observed. And over the centuries, we saw something change within your species, something that was not there before, something that we could not ignore." The words rang in Annabelle's ears. What change? What had happened that had made humanity different? "You see, humans, in the face of destruction and war, have managed to keep their core values intact. You fight not just for survival, but for ideals, values that are, frankly, foreign to many of us in this room," Ithra said. His words sent a ripple of discomfort through the assembled alien delegates. "Your capacity for mercy, for compassion, for unity, is unique." Annabelle looked at her team, trying to process what was being said. They weren't just talking about humanity's military strength or technological advances. They were talking about something deeper. The Council had been watching humanity for centuries, and now, for the first time, they were acknowledging something that no other species had seen before. Humanity's ability to unite under extreme pressure, to fight for something greater than themselves. "This is why we trust you," Ithra added, his voice now tinged with a sense of finality. "This is why we allow you to enter our chambers unarmed. We believe that your species has grown beyond the limitations that once defined you. We believe that you have earned the right to stand among us." Annabelle felt a strange mix of pride and unease. To be trusted like this, to be given the privilege that no other species had ever received, it was both an honor and a terrifying responsibility. But she still didn't understand. What had changed about humanity? What was it about the human spirit that made the Galactic Council trust them? As the words echoed in her mind, Annabelle could feel the weight of history pressing down on her. The past, the present, and the future were all intertwined in this single moment. The Council's revelation was not just about humanity's present strength, it was about their potential. Then, as if on cue, the speaker's voice dropped to a whisper. "But we also know that power is fleeting, and even the brightest of stars can burn out," Ithra warned. "There are forces, ancient forces, that still oppose your kind. They would see humanity fall, not rise. They will test you, just as the ancient ones did. They will try to bring you to your knees, and you must be ready." Annabelle's heart raced. The stakes had just been raised. The peaceful reputation of humanity was no guarantee of survival. There were enemies, forces lurking in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. "You must prove yourselves, humans," Ithra said, his eyes locking with Annabelle's. "You must show us that your strength lies not in your weapons, but in your unity. Only then will you truly earn your place in the galaxy." The word hung in the air, and for a moment, no one spoke. Annabelle understood now. The test was not just a test of strength or intellect. It was a test of humanity's very soul. Could they unite against impossible odds? Could they prove that their ideals, their compassion, and their willingness to fight for others was enough to secure peace? She took a deep breath, steadying herself. There was no turning back now. As the council members turned their attention to the next topic of discussion, Annabelle's mind raced. The path ahead was uncertain, and the dangers were immense. But for the first time, she understood why humanity had been trusted to enter the council unarmed. It was not just because they had the potential to lead. It was because humanity had the potential to inspire. Annabelle and her team stood silently as the doors of the Galactic Council's chamber slid shut behind them. The atmosphere was heavy with expectation, the silence broken only by the soft hum of advanced technology embedded within the walls. Looking around, Annabelle couldn't help but feel dwarfed by the presence of the various alien species surrounding her. The chamber was enormous, with high vaulted ceilings and sleek metallic surfaces that seemed to stretch forever. Yet, despite the grandeur of the room, it felt cold, impersonal. The council members were seated in an elevated circle, each representative from different corners of the galaxy observing the human delegation with varying expressions, some curious, others skeptical, and a few outright hostile. The fact that humans had been invited here was extraordinary in itself. No species had ever been trusted to enter the chamber without weapons, but humanity had been granted that rare privilege. Yet, as Annabelle's eyes flicked to the empty spaces between her team, she felt an unsettling sense of vulnerability. Was this trust genuine, or was there something darker at play? No one had ever openly discussed the reasons for humanity's unarmed status, and Annabelle was now beginning to feel the weight of the decision. The council's silence hung in the air, pregnant with unspoken questions and challenges. Suddenly, a low rumble echoed through the chamber as Speaker Ithra, the leader of the council, rose from his seat. His presence commanded immediate attention. His long, ethereal robes shimmered as he moved, his alien features almost glowing under the soft light that bathed the room. As the rest of the delegates quieted down, Annabelle couldn't help but feel a sense of awe. Ithra was a living legend, a representative of one of the most ancient and powerful species in the galaxy. His words carried weight, and even the other council members seemed to defer to him. He spoke slowly, each word measured, as if the very act of speaking to humans was a calculated decision. "We have observed your species for millennia. Ithra began, his voice resonating throughout the room. From the moment humanity first set foot beyond your home planet, we watched with great interest. Your potential was clear, but so too was your history of violence, conflict, and division. The Ancient Ones, the beings who established the foundations of this council, tested your kind. They sought to measure whether humans could rise above their primal instincts, whether they could ever become a force for peace. You failed them. Annabelle's stomach churned at the mention of humanity's past. She had read the records, learned about the mistakes of the past, the wars, the betrayals, and the violent history that had shaped the course of human development. The council had observed them from the beginning, never forgetting, always watching. And yet, humanity had been kept at arm's length, isolated from the greater galactic community, deemed too dangerous to be trusted. Until now. But something has changed, Ithra continued, his gaze shifting to Annabelle. In recent centuries, we have watched a shift in your species, something we did not expect. Despite your history, you have shown a capacity for resilience, for unity in times of chaos. You have risen from the ashes of war, not as conquerors, but as survivors. And for the first time, we see a species that, while imperfect, may one day be capable of bridging the divide between us all. Annabelle absorbed his words slowly, still trying to make sense of what she was hearing. This was not the story she had been told about humanity's place in the galaxy. The Council had always viewed humanity with distrust, and yet here they were, speaking of trust, unity, and change. The implications were profound. It wasn't just that humanity had earned the right to be here. It was that humanity had become a symbol of something greater, something that could unite the galaxy rather than divide it. But even as Ithra spoke of humanity's potential, Annabelle could sense the tension in the room. The council members' expressions ranged from cautious optimism to thinly veiled skepticism. Some seemed intrigued by what Ithra was saying, but others clearly did not share his confidence. The Vahani, with their warrior-like culture, looked uneasy, their eyes narrowed in suspicion. The Elris, a race known for their cold logic, seemed to be weighing the decision carefully, their stone-like faces unreadable. Even though humanity was being granted this rare opportunity, Annabelle knew that the road ahead would not be easy. Trust, once broken, was hard to rebuild. The silence in the chamber deepened as Ithra finished his speech. His words hung in the air like a challenge. Humanity has earned the right to enter our chambers unarmed, not because of your military strength or your technological advancements, but because you have something far more valuable, something we have not seen in many of the other species. You have the ability to fight not just for survival, but for ideals. You fight for something greater than yourselves. Annabelle's heart beat faster. This was the moment, the revelation they had all been waiting for. Humanity wasn't just another species trying to conquer the stars. It was a species that, despite its flaws, could offer something the galaxy needed: hope. Hope that peace could be achieved. Hope that unity was possible. Hope that the galaxy could heal its deep wounds and work together towards something better. But as the speaker's words resonated in her mind, Annabelle also understood the gravity of what was being asked of humanity. The Council had placed its trust in them, but that trust came with a price. There were no guarantees. Humanity would need to prove itself, not just in word but in action. The eyes of the galaxy were now upon them, and failure was not an option. Annabelle couldn't help but wonder, was humanity ready for this responsibility? Could they rise above their past and show the galaxy that they were capable of something more than war? The future of humanity's place in the galactic community rested on this delicate balance between hope and fear, trust and doubt. As the room filled with murmurs of agreement and disquiet, Annabelle's mind raced. The task ahead was monumental, but one thing was clear: humanity had earned its chance. Now, it was time to prove they were worthy of it. As the meeting continued, Annabelle's thoughts raced. The weight of the Council's revelation was starting to sink in, and with it came an overwhelming sense of responsibility. The trust they had placed in humanity, This unprecedented chance to prove themselves on a galactic scale was both an honor and a burden. What did Ithra mean by humanity's potential? Could they really bridge the divides of the galaxy, uniting warring factions and forgotten species under one banner of peace? Her mind drifted back to the history books, to the wars, the bloodshed, and the countless lives lost in the pursuit of power. Humanity had fought for survival, yes, but peace. Peace had always seemed like an unreachable ideal, one that slipped through their fingers every time they reached for it. Was this new, unarmed status merely a symbolic gesture, or would it be the test that defined humanity's future? Annabelle snapped back to the present as Ithra's voice broke through her reverie. Your species has shown resilience, a surprising ability to unite in moments of crisis. Ithra continued, his gaze fixed on the humans. And in the wake of your recent conflicts, we have seen a new humanity emerge, one that seeks not conquest, but understanding. One that values peace, even in the face of great adversity. That is why we have chosen to trust you. Annabelle felt a cold sweat creeping along the back of her neck. The implications of these words were immense. The Council was willing to stake its credibility on humanity's ability to fulfill this vision of peace, but they weren't just trusting humanity's peaceful intentions, they were challenging humanity to prove it. And if they failed, the consequences would be disastrous. What happens if we fail? Ethan, her second-in-command, asked, his voice cutting through the silence that had settled over the room. Ithra's eyes darkened for a brief moment, and a low murmur passed through the delegates. The air grew thick with tension. Annabelle could sense that this wasn't just a hypothetical question. There was something real, something tangible behind Ethan's query. If you fail, Ithra said, his voice calm but filled with authority, it will not just be a failure of humanity, it will be a failure for all of us. The galaxy is teetering on the edge of chaos. The peace we have fought for, the fragile alliance that holds us together, could crumble in an instant. If you cannot succeed in this task, humanity will be barred from joining the Council. You will be isolated again, and your place in the future of this galaxy will be in doubt forever. The gravity of the situation hit Annabelle like a punch to the gut. This wasn't just about diplomacy. This wasn't just about earning humanity's place among the stars. This was about survival, galactic survival. If humanity failed, the ripple effect would be felt across the galaxy. Trust would be broken, and the delicate alliances that held the galaxy together would fall apart. There were factions, ancient and powerful, that had never believed humanity belonged here. If humanity couldn't prove its worth, they would be cast aside. And with them, any hope of peace. The thought was enough to make her feel dizzy, but she knew there was no turning back. They were committed now. Ithra's voice interrupted her spiraling thoughts. The task before you is not simple. We will send you to Carathis, a world long divided by conflict. There you will be tasked with bringing peace to the warring factions, the Vahani and the Elris. If you succeed, the galaxy will see that humanity is ready to take its place among us. But if you fail, there will be no second chances. The council members nodded in unison, their faces unreadable. Some looked indifferent, as though they had already judged humanity's fate. Others watched Annabelle with cautious eyes, waiting for her response. But one thing was certain, humanity's future now rested on her shoulders. She could feel the weight of their gaze pressing down on her, their expectations hanging in the balance. Could humanity, despite its history of war and division, bring peace to Carathis? The Vahani, a fierce and warlike species, had been locked in a brutal conflict with the Elris for decades, with no sign of resolution in sight. The idea that a small human delegation, armed with nothing but words and resolve, could change that reality seemed almost impossible. Annabelle turned to face her team, searching their faces for answers. Ethan, her most trusted officer, nodded solemnly. He had been with her through countless diplomatic missions, but this was unlike anything they had faced before. He didn't speak, but the determination in his eyes was enough. They were in this together. The fate of your species depends on the success of this mission, Ithra continued. You will be tested in ways you cannot yet understand. You will face dangers that will test your resolve, your unity, and your capacity for peace. But remember this, the galaxy is watching. And if you succeed, you will prove that humanity belongs among us. Annabelle's pulse quickened. The weight of those words settled deep into her chest. This wasn't just a test of diplomacy or military might. This was a test of humanity's very soul. Could they rise above their past mistakes and forge a path toward something greater? Could they become the bridge between warring factions, the ones who held the key to a lasting peace? The room grew silent again. Annabelle took a deep breath, her mind racing. The mission was clear, but the challenges ahead were daunting. Carathis was a war-torn world, a place where hope had long since withered away. And yet in that very place, humanity would be given its chance to prove its worth. Very well, Annabelle said, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions swirling inside her. We accept the mission. Humanity will not fail. Ithra nodded, a faint smile crossing his face. We shall see. The gravity of the task ahead was undeniable. As the council session came to an end, Annabelle couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. She had no idea what awaited them on Carathis, but she knew one thing for sure. Humanity's future was now inextricably linked with the fate of the galaxy. The moment the meeting adjourned, Annabelle felt the weight of the galaxy pressing down on her. The council's words were still echoing in her mind, each syllable a reminder of what was at stake. She and her team were being sent to Carathis, a planet divided by war and distrust, a place where the very idea of peace seemed impossible. But the council had placed their trust in humanity, and now it was up to them to prove that trust was not misplaced. As the delegates filed out of the chamber, Annabelle remained in her seat, her hands trembling slightly as she gripped the table. Ethan stood beside her, his expression unreadable, though she could sense his own anxiety. The enormity of the task ahead was weighing on both of them. They had faced difficult missions before, but this felt different. This wasn't just about diplomacy or securing a fragile alliance. This was about showing the galaxy that humanity could rise above its history of conflict and fight for something greater than itself. Are you sure we're ready for this? Ethan's voice was quiet, but it carried the same edge of uncertainty that Annabelle herself felt. She glanced up at him, trying to steady her breath. I don't know, she admitted, her voice low. But we don't have a choice. If we don't succeed, the consequences are too high. It's not just our future. It's the future of the galaxy, and we can't afford to fail. Ethan nodded slowly, his expression still tense. We've always managed to find a way, Annabelle. But this feels different. The stakes are enormous. Annabelle gave a small, bitter laugh. You're telling me. The room around them was slowly emptying, the sounds of the other delegations' hushed conversations floating in the background. Annabelle's mind raced, trying to process the gravity of what lay ahead. Carathis was a planet torn apart by years of warfare, home to two bitterly opposed factions, the Vahani, a warrior species driven by honor and strength, and the Elris, a race known for their cold logic and emotional distance. These two groups had been at war for generations, their conflicts becoming more entrenched with every passing year. Now, the Council was sending humanity, unarmed and unprepared, to bring peace between them. How could she possibly succeed where so many others had failed? The thought gnawed at her. And yet, deep inside, there was something else, a small flickering ember of hope. She had seen what humanity was capable of when they united for a common cause. She had seen them fight not just for survival, but for ideals, ideals of peace, justice, and unity. If anyone could change the course of history, it was humanity. I'll prepare the team for departure, Ethan said, pulling Annabelle out of her thoughts. But we need more information. We need to know exactly what we're walking into. The council hasn't told us much about Carethus. Annabelle nodded. Agreed. I'll get in touch with our intelligence officers. We need to know the state of the factions on the ground, their leadership, their resources, and we need to figure out where we stand with both the Vahani and the Elris before we land. If they even think we're there to interfere, it could turn into a disaster. Ethan hesitated. You really think we can bring these two factions to the table? The Vahani don't trust anyone who isn't armed, and the Elris, they see emotions as weaknesses. Annabelle sighed, her gaze drifting toward the massive chamber doors. I don't know, but if we don't try, if we don't take the chance, then what's the point of us being here? Ethan didn't respond, but the look in his eyes said everything. He understood. This mission wasn't just a test of diplomacy. It was a test of humanity's spirit, their capacity to adapt, to change, and to rise above the darkness of their past. As they left the chamber, Annabelle's thoughts turned to the journey ahead. The path to Carethus would be long, and the challenges would be immense, but humanity had always thrived in the face of adversity. Perhaps this was the moment when they would prove to the galaxy and to themselves that they had outgrown the mistakes of their past. The next few days were a blur of preparations. Annabelle and her team made arrangements for their travel to Carethus, coordinating with the Council's fleet and gathering as much intelligence as they could. It was clear that the situation on the planet was dire. Carethus had been torn apart by years of conflict, and now the warring factions seemed beyond the reach of any peacekeeping efforts. But the Council had placed its faith in them. Humanity would be given the chance to mediate, to find common ground between two peoples who had never known anything but war. Annabelle spent long hours reading reports, speaking with analysts, and drafting plans. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. She wasn't sure what it was, but there was an undercurrent of tension in everything she read, everything she heard. The situation on Carethus was more volatile than anyone had anticipated. It wasn't just the Vahani and the Elris who posed a threat. There were other forces at play, shadowy organizations and individuals who stood to lose everything if peace were achieved. Annabelle knew they would be walking into a dangerous web of politics and power struggles, and it was only a matter of time before everything began to unravel. Despite the uncertainty, Annabelle remained determined. She had come this far, and there was no turning back now. She wasn't just fighting for humanity's place in the galaxy. She was fighting for the future of every species who believed in the possibility of peace. The night before they were scheduled to depart, Annabelle stood on the balcony of her quarters, gazing out at the distant stars. Carethus was waiting. The factions were waiting. The galaxy was waiting. And now it was up to her and her team to make sure humanity's place in the future of the galaxy was secure. As she stared into the infinite expanse, a single thought burned in her mind. Failure was not an option. The flight to Carethus was long, but for Annabelle and her team, it felt like an eternity. Every hour that passed in the sterile, silent confines of the ship added to the pressure mounting on her shoulders. The weight of the task at hand, the responsibility of representing humanity's place in the galaxy, was never far from her mind. She knew that the fate of the mission, and perhaps the future of peace in the galaxy, rested on their ability to navigate the fragile, volatile situation on Carethus. The ship finally broke through Carethus' atmosphere, and the sprawling landscape below came into view. The planet's surface was scarred by years of conflict, vast stretches of barren wasteland, punctuated by the occasional city that had been rebuilt and abandoned countless times. The signs of war were everywhere, smoke rising from distant battlefields, abandoned military vehicles rusting in the harsh desert heat, and the remnants of infrastructure that had long since crumbled under the weight of endless fighting. Annabelle stood at the window, her hands clasped behind her back, taking in the sight. The mission had been clear from the beginning, but seeing the planet's destruction with her own eyes made the reality of it all hit home. Could they really bring peace here? Was it even possible? Planet's surface is as bad as the reports said, Ethan said, standing beside her. If we don't tread carefully, this could turn into a war zone again. I know, Annabelle replied quietly, her gaze not leaving the broken planet below. But we don't have a choice. This is our one chance. If we fail here, the galaxy will never trust humanity to mediate anything ever again. Ethan didn't respond, but Annabelle could feel his agreement in the tense silence that followed. There were no second chances on Carethus. The pressure was mounting. But it was too late to turn back now. The shuttle descended through the planet's atmosphere, coming in for a smooth landing just outside one of the neutral zones that had been established between the Vahani and Elris factions. It was the only place where both sides agreed to meet, though neither trusted the other enough to make any real progress toward peace. The neutral zone was a patchwork of makeshift structures and defensive fortifications, nothing too grand, just enough to hold the fragile ceasefire that had been in place for a few months. Annabelle and her team were escorted by a small group of council soldiers, their faces impassive and stern, as they led the humans toward the designated meeting hall. The soldiers had been instructed to stay neutral, but it was clear that their presence was more about keeping the peace than offering protection. Neither the Vahani nor the Elris trusted humans, and with good reason. The last time an outsider had tried to intervene on Carethus, they had been swiftly ejected, or worse. As they entered the meeting hall, the atmosphere grew even more tense. The Vahani were already present, their massive, muscular forms standing tall at one end of the room. Their eyes were hard, their expressions unreadable, but Annabelle knew better than to assume that meant they were calm. They were warriors, born to fight, not to negotiate. Their leader, General Vekor, stood in front of the group, his heavy armor gleaming under the harsh lights of the chamber. His reputation was known throughout the galaxy, ruthless, aggressive, and relentless in battle. At the other end of the room stood the Elris delegation, their angular faces cold and aloof, their pale skin reflecting an eerie glow under the chamber's artificial lights. They were the opposite of the Vahani, logical, calculating, and precise. Their leader, High Counselor Neris, regarded the humans with a distant, almost condescending air. The Elris were not known for their diplomacy, nor were they interested in any negotiations that weren't in their favor. Annabelle's heart raced as she took in the scene. Both sides stood at opposite ends of the room, eyes locked on each other, as if daring the other to make the first move. The silence was deafening. Annabelle knew the stakes. This was no ordinary diplomatic mission. This was about trust, unity, and peace. Both sides had been locked in conflict for centuries, and if humanity was to succeed in bringing them together, it would require more than words. It would require patience, understanding, and an almost impossible level of diplomacy. She stepped forward, her team following her closely behind. She had prepared for this moment, studied every report, and practiced every possible scenario in her mind. But standing here, in the heart of this broken world, she knew there was no blueprint for what they were about to face. As Annabelle approached the center of the room, the Vahani and Elris leaders turned their cold gazes toward her. General Vekor's eyes narrowed, sizing her up as if she were an opponent on the battlefield. High Counselor Neris raised an eyebrow, almost as if amused by her presence. Annabelle swallowed the nervous lump in her throat and took a steadying breath. "We've been sent here by the Galactic Council," she began, her voice steady but firm. "We are here to offer a path to peace between your factions. The war has gone on long enough. Countless lives have been lost, and yet there is no victory for either side. It's time to find another way." Her words were simple, but they felt like a challenge to everything they believed in, everything they had fought for. The room seemed to grow colder as she spoke. The Vahani were a proud warrior race, and they would never admit to weakness. The Elris, with their cool logic, would see humanity's intervention as nothing more than a nuisance at best, and an imposition at worst. General Vekor was the first to speak, his voice a deep rumble that seemed to shake the room. "Peace," he spat, as if the word itself tasted bitter in his mouth. "The Vahani do not need peace. We need victory. and we will not accept the counsel of any outsider, least of all humans. Neris, too, was quick to respond, though her voice was far more composed. Your species has no place in this conflict. We did not ask for your help, nor do we need it. We've learned to settle our differences without the interference of those who are too naive to understand the complexities of war. Annabelle's gaze shifted between the two leaders, her heart pounding. The tension in the room had escalated in an instant. This was not going to be easy. I'm not here to tell you what to do, she replied, keeping her tone calm and measured. But I am here to offer you something else. A choice. You can keep fighting and continue to destroy your world and each other, or you can choose to sit down and listen. We have faced our own wars, our own divisions, but we learned that fighting only leads to more death. The path of peace isn't easy, but it is the only one that leads to a future. For a moment, no one spoke. The room was thick with unspoken words and simmering anger. Annabelle could feel the weight of the decision pressing on her, but she also knew that there was no going back. This was their chance, humanity's chance, to show the galaxy that they were capable of something greater than war. The silence in the room stretched on, thick with tension. The Vahani and Elris leaders exchanged looks, their disdain for each other palpable in the air. Annabelle stood in the middle, trying to hold her ground against the growing unease. She knew the stakes. If they failed here, the chance for peace in the galaxy would slip further away, and humanity would be seen as just another species, unable to handle the responsibility given to them. General Vaker's eyes flickered briefly toward his own delegation, his jaw tightening. You speak of peace, human, but peace is born from strength, not words. The Vahani do not bow to anyone, least of all a weak, unarmed delegation from a species that has yet to earn its place among the stars. Annabelle's heart pounded as she met his gaze. The fire in his eyes was unmistakable, the warrior spirit that had driven his people through countless battles. She had to tread carefully. Any wrong move could tip the fragile balance into conflict. We do not ask you to bow, General, Annabelle responded, her voice steady despite the tremor of fear in her chest. We ask you to listen. You are not the only ones who know war. Humanity has faced its own struggles, its own battles. But we learned something through all of it. There is always a better way. There is always room for a second chance. The Elris delegation shifted, the subtle movement drawing Annabelle's attention. High Counselor Neris, who had been silent until now, raised an eyebrow. The cold, calculating expression on her face made it impossible to read her thoughts. You say there is always a better way, Neris interjected, her voice measured, almost too calm. But your species, humanity, has no real understanding of the consequences of failure. Your people have committed atrocities, fought endless wars, and yet you believe you have the wisdom to unite two races that have been in conflict for centuries. What makes you think you can succeed where others have failed? Annabelle fought the urge to snap back. She knew Neris was trying to provoke her, but she couldn't afford to let her emotions rule. The galaxy was watching them, and her every word, every action would be scrutinized. We don't claim to have all the answers, Annabelle said, her voice soft but firm. But we have something that you don't have right now, the will to try. The Vahani have fought, the Elris have calculated, but neither side has truly sought peace. You've been locked in a cycle of destruction for too long. What we offer is not just a ceasefire, but a chance to heal, to rebuild what was broken. For a moment, no one spoke. The tension between the two factions simmered, as if they were waiting for a reason to erupt. Annabelle could feel the weight of their eyes on her, but she refused to look away. This was her moment to show them that humanity wasn't just a species of warriors. It was a species of peacekeepers, capable of offering more than just force. It was then that General Vaker spoke again, his voice low but full of challenge. And what if we don't want peace? What if war is the only way for us to grow stronger? You cannot force us to submit to your ideals. You do not understand the price of victory as we do. Annabelle's breath caught in her throat. There it was again, the deep-rooted belief that only through violence could they prove their strength. She could see the bitterness in Vaker's eyes, the scars of countless battles that had made him who he was. He saw peace as weakness. The Vahani viewed strength as their birthright, and peace as a foreign concept. "I don't want to force anyone into peace, General," Annabelle replied, her voice steady. "But I believe you're right. You can fight. You can continue to destroy your world, your people. But tell me, what will you gain in the end? Will it be victory? Or will it just be more destruction, more death? There's only so much that can be rebuilt. How many times must you burn your own home before you realize there's nothing left to fight for?" For the first time, Vaker's expression faltered. A flicker of doubt passed over his face before he masked it with anger. Annabelle saw the tiniest crack in his armor, and she pressed on. "I'm not here to take your pride away," she continued, "or to tell you what your people should or shouldn't believe. I'm here to offer you a chance to look beyond the battle, to see what's waiting after the fight. The galaxy is watching you. We all want peace, and we have the ability to make it happen, but it can only begin when you are willing to lay down your weapons." There was a brief moment of silence, but this time it felt different. General Vaker stood unmoving, his sharp gaze now seeming to question everything he had ever known. Nerys, too, remained silent, her calculating eyes studying Annabelle as though weighing her every word. Then, unexpectedly, it was Nerys who spoke. Her voice, as always, was calm and precise, but there was an edge to it this time. "You speak of peace as though it is a simple matter of will. But there is more to it than just choosing to stop fighting. We Elris do not make decisions based on emotions or fleeting ideals. We make them based on logic, and the logic here is that peace cannot be achieved if one side continues to seek victory through conflict." Annabelle nodded, feeling a rush of hope. Nerys's words were a breakthrough, however small. For the first time, the Elris were acknowledging the possibility that peace might be attainable, even if only through careful calculation. "Then let us calculate together," Annabelle said. "Let us build something new. If we are to prove humanity's worth, we must show that we can be the ones to guide the galaxy toward peace, not through dominance, not through force, but through understanding." The room fell silent again, and the tension hung thick in the air. But this time, it wasn't the silence of hostility. It was the silence of contemplation. Annabelle's heart raced, but she knew they had made a small but important step forward. Whether they could convince the factions to follow that path was still uncertain. But for the first time since landing on Carathis, there was a sliver of hope. The walls between the Vahani and Elris had not come down completely, but they had begun to crack. Annabelle turned to her team, her voice low but resolute. "This is just the beginning. We have to hold steady. We've made them listen, but now we need to give them a reason to believe in what we're offering." Ethan gave her a nod of agreement, and the rest of the team silently acknowledged the heavy task ahead. They knew the journey was far from over, but they also knew this moment would be the turning point. If humanity could find a way to guide these factions toward peace, it would not only secure their place in the galaxy, it would redefine what it meant to be human.